In this week's Cambridge Independence Letters page, Peter Rayner writes in to defend Coton Orchard, in which he grew up as a child during the war.
I write to put some of the inaccuracies in the posturing of the local council into some perspective. I write, in fact, in defence of the orchard in which I grew up in as a child during the war, and in fact worked in until I commenced my national service in 1952. Indeed, I lived with my parents in Sonoya, the house on the hill. Let me describe the orchard from my indelible memories and take you from the damsons on the roadside by the gate of what is now the garden centre. Those damson trees alongside the road acted as a protection from winds, and I was always told that their blossom attracted the bees early, as it coincided with what any apple grower will call pink bud time. From just beyond the gate, you came down to the lanes Prince Albert, the first of the apples, then Laxton's superb, Cox's orange, and Allingtons. I know not what sort of Allingtons, but what they were, that's what they were called. Please, any fruit expert, forgive my errors of detail, that is, because although fruit growing is in my blood, some of those memories got lost in my 50 years plus of mostly hands-on railway operation. Moving on from the apples and thus coming to plums, which I will recall in order of their usual picking time, although I could take you to each section. They are the early rivers, the purple Pershores, the Tsars, the Victorias, green gauges, presidents, ponds, and finally the monarchs. Now, to return to the inaccurate statements of local politicians regarding the parameters of the orchard and the area before the gas store was built. I understand that area is now the location of a cafe and shop. Any suggestion that that shop area has destroyed any substantial part of the orchard is manifestly not true. I could take you to the parameters of the storage area, for I watched it being built. I also spent many hours loading bushel boxes of apples, stacked, I think, 8 high, and then with pallets on top, and then another 8 put above. I was fit in those days for swinging them below the knee level to above head heights. It was indeed a young man's work. I could also show you roughly where Amy, the big Shire horse, had her stable before the cold store, but in the same area roughly. Amy was named after Amy Johnson, the famous pilot and explorer. Amy came before we had Fords and tractors, which were also, I might say, a devil to start on the handle, and indeed years before the Ferguson tractor of my teenage days. My memories of Amy, who spent her summers up on the hill with us in the garden of Sonoya, used to walk home via the road, up the hill, and then up the drive with myself perched on its back. I was allowed to take her on my own when very, very young child, and I often used to pull the reins to see if I could get Amy to go towards Cambridge. But in fact, although I thought I was taking her home, she was, of course, taking me home, because I don't think I was much taller than her feet. Beyond the gas door, returning to the orchard itself, there were Worcester Pearmain, Newton Wonders, interspersed with Bramleys, the Newton Row, then the Bramley Row, then the Newton Row across that portion. Tons of apples year on year to be collected by lorries down from Covent Garden. Some were loaded on the front for Covent Garden itself. then some destined for Spitalfields Market. I remember drivers saying to my father, "Those on the back, George, are for the borough." It was an odd language to me. I found those drivers, with their London accents and quick patter, astonishing beings. Got to get back for the fireworks meant nothing to me, because we didn't have fireworks during the war. They were talking about the Blitz, I realised years after. All part of my childhood memories, made alive again because of the busway nonsense. Finally, I turn briefly to other important aspects of life. The orchard played a part in with us. We had refugees camping in the orchard, learned men and women, academics, who must have gravitated towards Cambridge from the troubled parts of Europe, for we were always a home to refugees. They were, for the most part, I think, Austrian Jews, men and women of great knowledge. As a small child, I recall one of these gentlemen telling me to watch and observe the slightly oscillating back of our old black Labrador Sue as she walked along, and see how that spinal wobble could trace us back to having once been fish. It stayed in my mind, and indeed, if it's nonsense, then I'd pass that nonsense down to my children and to my grandchildren. But whatever it was part of the orchard. I also recall bombers returning in the early dawn hours, low over the land, lower still over the hill, many with engines stopped, easily seen, as with the engine stopped one could see the propellers themselves, planes limping back to Bourne and to Oakington. Cambourne today, I suppose. To see the orchard as a collection of trees is itself a flawed approach. It is, and always has been, one of the heritage aspects of Cambridge and the surrounding villages. It is somewhat ironical, but I also recall from my younger days an impressive person referred to by my father as Mr. Figus Walker, who visited us regularly to remind us that the land belonged to the Cambridge Preservation Society. He, in fact, complained that to build the cold store would be an eyesore. My father's response was, it was no bigger eyesore than the obelisk, like the university library, and he then used to point to the library on the Cambridge skyline, visible from the hill. My father managed that orchard for many, many years with knowledge and great love. My brother and I were born there. I worked in the orchard all through my school days, and indeed in the gap from leaving school and joining British Railways in 1951. The orchard is mentioned in my autobiography, On and Off the Rails. I helped my father plant some of what were then the maiden Worcesters, and I could take you to that exact spot. I visit Cambridge rarely, but am an old pussy and get information about the affairs of the area, and as a consequence, being a reader of both the Times and the Observer, I have seen reference to the act of environmental vandalism. If a concrete busway is driven through the middle of the orchard, it will not just destroy 500 trees and wild habitats, it will make that orchard impossible to manage and kill one of Cambridge's heritages. It is my intention now to research further some aspects and involve some colleagues in the whole question of the Cambourne conundrum. I know from my time as an advisor to the Transport Select Committee of the House of Commons under Mrs. Dunwoody, a redoubtable woman, just how many insects there are under the stones if you can move those stones to one side. I propose to visit the orchard quite soon, if I may, and surrounding buildings of my youth. Sincerely,